How does the brain give rise to consciousness? How does it generate conscious feelings? I'll say I don't accept that problem because those questions presuppose dualism.
Mind-body dualism, as we know it today, tracks back to René Descartes in the 1600s. Actually, I'll just let him explain it. He'll probably do a better job.
Hear me, good sirs and ladies. Having resolved to doubt all things that might be doubted, I found at length one truth so firm that no skeptic could shake it. I think, therefore I am. From this clear and distinct light, I discern two kinds of substance. The body is an extended thing, spread in length, breadth, and depth, divisible, measurable, and obedient to the laws of matter. The mind is a thinking thing, indivisible, not extended in space, whose very essence is to think, to will, to imagine, to feel. Though in life they are joined most closely, their natures are not the same. For I can clearly conceive myself as a mind without any body. Yet no mere body can be conceived to think. By their commerce our passions stir, and our limbs obey, but their being is twofold. Thus I set the distinction of mind and body at the foundation of philosophy.
It's very hard to believe that consciousness is just a brain process.
Right.
It's very intuitive to think consciousness is something extra, that the brain gives rise to consciousness, that it generates consciousness. That's a very intuitive idea. Humans can't help but think that the Earth is standing still. They can't help but think that the sun moves. But I mean, these are intuitions, and we've learned to realize that they're mistaken. So it's not the brain gives rise to consciousness, it's just consciousness is part of the brain's processing. It just is certain physical processes. So as a materialist, I'll reject that question. I'll say the brain doesn't give rise to consciousness.
David Papineau is a philosopher of mind who's spent a career making the clearest case that consciousness is just what the brain is doing. It's not a ghostly, mysterious add-on. He's the author of Thinking About Consciousness and the Metaphysics of Sensory Experience, where he dismantles the hard problem as a trick question that sneaks in dualism, an idea that we really just need to put in the bin once and for all. In this episode, we go through the best arguments for why consciousness is not fundamental, what we can learn from people without mental imagery, and we discuss the full spectrum of experiencing systems, from plants and bacteria all the way to conscious AI. Remember to subscribe so your predictive brain stops hallucinating that you already did. It really helps us out. David Papineau, what do you think is the single best argument for consciousness being material?
I guess the causal closure argument. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Please.
Your listeners are. Shall I?
Please go through the specifics.
Okay, here's the argument. So mental events and conscious mental events in particular clearly have effects in the physical world. I mean, I feel a pain. I pull my hand away from the hot stove. I consciously want to give you a philosophy example of a conscious event affecting the physical world, and I'll raise my hand. There's a physical event. My hand goes up because of what I wanted to do. Give you an example. So no, clearly mental events affect the physical world, in particular by affecting my behavior. Okay, that's premise one. Mental events, conscious mental events in particular, have physical effects. Premise two, all physical effects have full physical causes. Think of it from a scientific point of view. I mean, take the physical effects you're talking about. My body moves, some bit of behavior, my hand comes away from the fire. And imagine a scientist trying to understand the causes of that. And they'll say, well, it did happen because the muscle fibers contracted, and that happened because electrochemical messages came down your nerve cells, and that happened because of certain other electrochemical activity in the motor cortex. And the physiologists will expect to be able to trace that chain of events back just sticking at the physical level. Then I think they're going to have to go outside the physical realm to explain physical effects like my body moving. Okay, that's premise 2. All physical effects have full physical causes. Okay, so now what are we to make of that? I mean, is it like, this is an event, my arm moving, that has two different independent causes? I mean, sometimes physical effects do have two independent causes. I mean, imagine some poor man is shot and struck by lightning at the same time, two different causes producing one effect. The effect's overdetermined, and I mean, that does sometimes happen, but that seems the wrong model here. So I mean, in cases like that, we want to say, look, guy would still have died if the lightning hadn't hit him because he was shot, or he would still have died if he hadn't been shot because the lightning hit him. Each of the other causes would have been enough on their own. Seems very odd to say that I would still have raised my arm even if I hadn't wanted to because of the processes in my brain. That doesn't seem right. I would still have the other way around. What did I have? I'd raise my arm even if I hadn't wanted to because of processes in my brain, or I would have raised my arm if the motor cortex hadn't fired off because I wanted to. That looks wrong. It doesn't look like these are cases of overdetermination. So we don't want to say that every time there's a physical event involving my body moving, it's overdetermined by two independent causes. So that's premise 3. Physical events like bodily movements aren't always overdetermined by two independent causes. Okay, so now we've got everything in place, right? Premise 1 says that bodily movements have a mental cause. Premise 2 says bodily movements have a physical cause, motor cortex activity. Premise 3 says they don't have two different causes. There's only one way to satisfy all those premises, is to conclude that the mental cause is one and the same as neurochemical activity in the brain. So you understand how it is that the mental manages to influence bodily movements, which after all are fully accounted for by physical causes, by saying the mental event just is part of the physical causes. So that's a causal argument for materialism. And
really well explained. I love it.
If you don't want to be a materialist, you tell me how you're going to get out of it. I mean, I put it to people who disinclined to be materialists. Come on, you're going to have to deny. I mean, the argument looks pretty clearly valid. You're going to have to deny one of the premises. Which one do you want to deny?
So I've had the pleasure of having a number of consciousness is fundamental people on the podcast. And I would agree with you. My training is in neuroscience. I'm far more inclined my whole life to be materialist, physical idea that consciousness has a material substrate, there's physical stuff there that's creating consciousness.
Yeah.
I think what they would say if they were sitting in my place is consciousness is fundamental. The brain is some configuration that is channeling consciousness in some way. And basically all of the phenomena that you just described there is caused by the channeling of consciousness by the brain, but not actually from consciousness being inside the brain. Something like that, which I think is a sidestep, and which is how, I think they kind of, in trying to get around the hard problem, sort of substitute it with this sort of reverse hard problem where they say that consciousness is fundamental, somehow the brain channels it, but don't really give any satisfactory answers to how that might be. But I would guess that's somehow how they would answer that.
I'm not sure I really grasp this metaphor of the brain channeling consciousness. Look, I mean, you can. I mean, as I think about it, it's. I mean, I gave you an argument with three premises, and there are people who deny each of those premises, and it leads you to a position that's coherent, but to my mind, not really attractive. So you could deny premise one and say, look, mental events don't have effects in the physical world. I mean, this is a standard view that there's the brain, it kind of operates, it produces all the physical effects. And then in addition, it kind of generates conscious feelings like puffs of smoke, but just like the puffs of smoke in the train, the conscious feelings don't have any effect. I mean, that's epiphenomenalism, and that's a familiar enough view, but that doesn't sound like the channeling idea. And then there are people who say, not so familiar a view, look, there are two separate things. There's the brain processes and there's the separate consciousness, and they both are adequate to cause this event. There's a kind of overdetermination going on all the time. Sometimes this is referred to as the belt and braces view. You kind of make doubly sure the action is going to happen because there's two different causes in place. But I mean, that generates a question about, what's the mechanism that ensures there's always these two causes? I mean, sometimes we do put two causes in place. I mean, fail-safe devices, we make sure, doubly sure, that the chemical factory doesn't blow up. As soon as there's a leak, something else happens. There's two things that cause it not to blow up. Doesn't look the right model. It's too complicated for what's going on in the brain. Or you can deny the causal closure of the physical, the interesting second premise that all physical effects have physical causes. And in the history of philosophy, that's a standard view. If you think of Cartesian dualism, the conscious realm is outside the physical realm, but sometimes it comes down and makes a difference in the physical realm. That's a familiar enough position, interactive dualism. And you might well ask me, where did I give an argument against that? I just seemed to assume that it wasn't an option. I assumed that all the explanations would go on at the physical level. But I don't quite see which of those the channeling idea is supposed to be. I don't see how the channeling idea is really addressing the different components of the argument.
I would agree. I spoke to Dr. James Glatfelder, who is a complexity scientist, theoretical physicist. He said a lot of things on that podcast that I didn't understand, but he has lots of interesting ideas of idealism and why consciousness is fundamental. You answered that one really, really nicely. Of course, you've spent a lot of time thinking about this, but I'm really curious about the next one. What do you think is the best argument for consciousness being fundamental? Like, what's the strongest argument that's been put to you for consciousness being fundamental that's slightly made you go, ooh, that one's actually, there's a bit of weight to that one, maybe?
So what arguments do we have? I mean, I don't know how well-versed you are with all the...
Go through them. Consciousness has become a bit of a theme for the podcast, but that does not assume any knowledge. This is a complicated topic. So let's unpack it so the listeners can come along with us, because I think consciousness conversations can get too bogged down in the isms, and I like to just kind of use as common language as possible and try and get through it, the murky waters as they are.
Let me just gather my thoughts a bit. I
got you to squirm on one of them. I'm happy. It's a hard question because I wasn't sure.
No, I'm just getting it. There's a battery of arguments for dualism, or at least anti-materialism. There's something wrong with equating consciousness with physical processes in the philosophical literature, the recent philosophical literature. And let me say something about the hard problem first.
Yes, do it.
You referred to the hard problem earlier, and there's a question about what exactly is the hard problem. And I mean, Chalmers introduced it, 30 years ago? But if you look at what he writes, there's a bit of oscillation. I mean, sometimes he says, look, the hard problem is just understanding what the concept of consciousness refers to. It doesn't look like it's a kind of concept that we understand as a kind of aspect of the machinery, like, I don't know, intelligence or memory. It looks like it's a more fancy concept. And so what does it refer to? And that's one way of putting the hard problem. Another way of putting the hard problem is saying we need to understand how the brain gives rise to consciousness, how the brain generates conscious feelings. And I think these are two quite different questions being asked. And as a materialist, I'll say the first problem, it's a question. What does the concept consciousness refer to? But I don't see why it's so super hard. And as a materialist, I'll tell you what it refers to. It refers to certain brain processes. Where's the problem? I mean, I've just given you an argument. Certain brain processes. The second problem, how does the brain give rise to consciousness? How does it generate conscious feelings? I'll say I don't accept that problem because those questions presuppose dualism. I mean, we don't think that, I don't know, H2O gives rise to water, or electrical discharges give rise to lightning. Water just is H2O. So it's not the brain gives rise to consciousness. It's just consciousness is part of the brain's processing. It just is certain physical processes. I mean, fire gives rise to smoke because smoke is something different from the fire. So this give rise to talk is already dualist talk. And so as a materialist, I'll reject that question. I'll say the brain doesn't give rise to consciousness. So the hard problem is kind of it's a nice bit of rhetoric, but it's not an argument. Let me say something else before I come to the arguments. I've always said that part of the issue in this area, part of the difficulty, and this is a kind of problem, it's not an argument, but it's an issue, is that it's very hard to believe that consciousness is just a brain process.
Right. It's
very intuitive to think consciousness is something extra, that the brain gives rise to consciousness, that it generates consciousness. That's a very intuitive idea. So the idea that materialism is wrong and some kind of dualism must be right is very intuitive. I don't deny that. Human beings, a lot of the time, can't help but think that consciousness is something extra. I don't think that's an argument. That's just an intuition. I mean, humans can't help but think that the Earth is standing still. They can't help but think that the sun moves. But, I mean, these are intuitions, and we've learned to realize that they're mistaken. I think the causal argument I gave you at the beginning is a good argument to show that those intuitions are mistaken. But I don't deny that we have the intuition very strongly. And in a way, the rhetoric of the hard problem is just appealing to the intuition. It's kind of seducing you to think, how does the brain give rise to consciousness? And you don't realize that you've already assumed the denial of materialism. I don't think the brain gives rise to consciousness. I think consciousness just is part of what's going on in the brain. So that's all kind of rhetoric, intuitive background.
I really like that idea, by the way. And I think you're the first person that I've heard say it like that. The hard problem is kind of seen as this impenetrable fortress, this really complex thing with 100 meters of Teflon around it. That is you just can't budge it. But you're almost saying that it's not really a problem at all. It's just the integration of an organism's state in relation to its environment is what subjective experience is. Is that how you would summarize it? Because that's how I think about it.
That's what I think the truth is. And the hard problem, in a way, is just denying what I'm saying. It's not an argument. It's not a problem for me. I just don't think the presupposition of the hard problem is true. I mean, but
I think it is a problem for other people, though.
The hard problem is just an expression of the intuition that consciousness is non-material. I mean, look, let me try and construct an analogy. So I don't know what would be. Here's the hard problem. Why does the sun move through the sky every day when we know that it doesn't change its position from the morning to the evening? I mean, that would be an analogy. It's kind of taking the intuition that the sun moves, then saying, look, science doesn't really account for this, and we've got a terrible problem. But the answer is, look, no, the sun doesn't really move, right? How does the brain give rise to this extra thing? That's the hard problem. And the answer is, well, it doesn't. There isn't an extra. That's a mistake.
Do you think it's hurt the field of consciousness? Because I feel like so many researchers have kind of looked at consciousness and said, oh, that hard problem exists, and I don't think I'm going to make progress on it, so I'm not even going to go into the field of consciousness. Like, I think you would agree that it was a bit of a black hole of research for a while where people really didn't want to get into it. And I feel like that phrasing of hard problem kind of created this imaginary barrier where people didn't want to probe at it for the very phrasing of how it was placed. It's almost mythological, you know. It's the unslayable Hydra.
Okay, but there's an issue which I hope we'll get onto in a while, which is how much of the science of consciousness, all this research program of consciousness science, is generated by the kind of implicit, unthinking assumption that the hard problem is a real problem. How much of it is caused by people who think of themselves as materialist scientists, kind of half thinking there's this extra thing that there's some bit of magic that happens somewhere in the brain, and we've got to figure out where that goes on. And you might think that if you really free yourself from that kind of intuition, you wouldn't think that the science of consciousness was as much of a subject as many scientists do. So we'll come on to this because I'm not adamant about this, but I think it's a suspicion we should discuss. How far is the current wave of consciousness research motivated by some kind of implicit dualism, some kind closet dualism? People don't realize, haven't come out as they're committed to the thought there's something extra, some magic thing that happens somewhere in the brain. We've got to figure out where it is. If you think there's just brain processes and neuroscience is just, its job is to describe brain processes, you might wonder, well, where's the special thing that the problem of the scientific issue of consciousness is located? But we'll come back to that because we're digressing. The question you asked me is, are there any good arguments on the other side for dualism? And we haven't said anything about that. I've just said there's a lot of intuitions in favor of dualism. And I've said that the so-called hard problem is in a way an expression of these pro-dualist intuitions. But that doesn't show that there aren't also good arguments.
Yes.
Consciousness not being physical. Okay, so there's the knowledge argument, the Mary argument. That's a nice argument, and we can discuss that. And then there's
maybe go into the Mary argument quickly. Do you want to touch on the
conceivability argument, zombie arguments, and they get very messy. But in fact,
I don't like those. They're too philosophical for me. I'm a biologist. I don't like zombie arguments.
I can cut through those. Okay, so let's do it by. I'll do the Mary argument, and then I'll give you what I think is the kind of underlying meat of the zombie conceivability arguments, but not putting it in a way that philosophers at this point start talking about two-dimensional semantics and primary and secondary intentions and it took me a good few years to get my head around it. So
Yeah, my head's spinning just labeling those things. So I've been trying to drink less alcohol. And honestly, it's had a pretty big impact on my health. I'm sleeping better, I'm exercising more, and my business is growing. The data suggests that people are drinking less alcohol than ever, which overall I think is great, but I'm still looking for a little treat at the end of the workday or a hard workout. And that's where Sentia comes in. Sentia is a 0% alcohol drink that feels like you're drinking something special without any of the downsides. It's created by neuroscientists and it's designed to give you that relaxing buzz, the same kind of feeling you get from alcohol, but without the hangover, brain fog, or impact on sleep quality. And it tastes absolutely delicious. They already have a GABA red berry, which is perfect to mix with a tonic or orange, or GABA black, which is awesome with Coke. Personally, I've been really enjoying the GABA gold with Fanta lemon on ice.
That's actually genuinely delicious. Like, I'm not even play acting there, it's actually just really, really good.
So you might be wondering, how does a drink with 0% alcohol give you that buzz? It almost sounds too good to be true. Well, this is the really cool neuroscience part. The secret is GABA, the brain's natural calming agent. And the different GABA flavors have different cognitive effects. Sentia's founder, Dr. David Nutt, has published over 500 independent research papers and written 34 books on neuropharmacology. What Dr. Nutt realized was that we can harness the same calming, relaxing effects from alcohol without any of the side effects. I genuinely think this could be the future of drinking. And they're also just releasing their first beer and stout, which as an Irishman I am dying to compare to Guinness. Sentia are offering my viewers 10% off their first purchase, and I genuinely could not recommend it more. I think even if you're looking to just substitute your one gin and tonic on a Tuesday with Sentia, the accumulative health benefits over time will actually be very noticeable. So check out Sentia, again, 10% off at checkout.
Mary argument's nice and simple, right? So,
Yes.
okay, I'll do it just in case there are any viewers who haven't heard it, unlikely, but so I'll do it very fast. So Mary this is a thought experiment. She's a future neuroscientist. She specializes on vision. She specializes on color vision. She knows everything there is to know about color vision from a scientific point of view. She knows all about the rods and the cones, especially the cones and wavelengths and reflectance profiles and V1 and V4 and the whole thing. She knows everything there is to know. Right. But she's never actually seen any colors herself. She's lived all her life in a house where all the walls are gray and black and white, and all her books have only illustrations and they're black and white TV. Somebody comes and paints her skin grey every morning. And anyway, so she's never seen any colours. And then she comes out the house and she's shown red rosé, and the thought is she now learns something she didn't know before. She learns what it's like to have the experience of seeing something red. We can talk about red experiences. I mean, it's not the experiences red, it's shorthand for the experience you have when you look at something red. And so now we can construct an argument on the basis of the thought experiment. So the argument goes, well, before she came out, Mary knew about every physical, material aspect of color experience. That's by hypothesis. She knew all the physical features of color experience she knew about. After she comes out, she learns something more about color experiences. There's a feature of color experiences that she learns anew. Conclusion, there's at least one feature of color experience that's non-physical. And you might think this is the conscious feature, the phenomenal feature, what it's like. So the thought is color experiences involve a whole lot of brain processing, probably in V4 and neural oscillations in V4. And then it involves something extra that Mary didn't know about, namely the feeling that goes with those neural oscillations. So there you are. That's a nice knockdown argument for you. And what do you feel about that?
It's a really interesting one, but
Yeah.
for me, it seems it can be explained under a materialist framework where experience and semantics are just encoded in the brain differently. There's just a different pattern of neural firing for experience and a different neural pattern of firing for semantics. Is that not reasonable?
Yeah, I think one wants to bring in some kind of duality at the level of thinking about experiences. I think that that's what the materialist will say. They'll say it's, look, one thing, the argument is about Mary getting to know something new. Note that it's not just that something new happens to Mary. That's not a problem for materialism at all. I mean, materialists will agree. I mean, beforehand, she didn't ever have any read experiences. Now she comes out and something new happens in her brain. That's not an argument against materialism. Materialism will say that's exactly what's going on. Something new's happening in her brain. So there is that before-after difference, but that's not a problem for materialism. The problem is supposed to be that not just does she have the experience, but she now knows something about the experience that she didn't know before, but she knew all the physical features of experience. Doesn't that mean that there's some new feature? And what materialists will say is, look, she's, as a result of having had the experience, as it were, acquired a new word for the experience. She's acquired a new way of thinking about the experience. In particular, not just she had the experience, but now having had the experience, she can recreate it in imagination. I mean, that's a natural thing for a materialist to think. I mean, we can imagine experiences by turning on a kind of faint version, that bit of our visual cortex. We can kind of reactivate the trace that the original experience laid down. And you can do that if you've had the experience, but you can't do that before you've had the experience because your brain doesn't have a trace of it. So Mary now has this ability she didn't have before to recreate the experience in imagination. That's not a problem for materialists. And materialists will say that all that's going on when we say Mary knows something she didn't know before is she can think about what's actually neural oscillation phi in V4 by recreating an imagination, whereas before she could only think about it by saying neural oscillation phi in V4. So all that's happened is now Mary has a new word, as it were, a new mental word. It's recreating it in experience, in imagination, for something she could always refer to in the old scientific way. But there's just one thing there that she can now refer to in this new way. My colleague Tim Crane says at this point that two concepts, one thing. Philosophers love that. Philosophers love that. I mean, if you've done much philosophy, sense and reference, the morning star and the evening star, they refer to the same thing. It goes on. That's what's going on in here. I mean, look, here's a nice analogy. Suppose somebody they're a kind of educational historian. They're looking in the records. They discover that Archie Leach was born in Bristol, went to a certain primary school, okay? And then they read Movie Magazine and they discover that Cary Grant was born in Bristol, went to the same primary school. And they didn't know that before. Now they've learned something new. Does that mean there's an extra person in the primary school over and above the person that they have always called Archie Leach? No. I mean, there's a sense in which they've learned something they didn't know before, that Cary Grant went to, but Cary Grant and Archie Leach refer to the same person. That's exactly what's happened to Mary. There's a sense in which she now knows what looking at a red rose is like, because she can think about it using her new concept. Philosophers call these phenomenal concepts. Concepts involve recreating an imagination, but it doesn't mean that there's some extra feature in reality different from what she always referred to as oscillation phi in V4.
Right.
So
I can't help but mention I think it's a really interesting thought experiment. Yeah. I can't help but think of the variant of it where Mary has aphantasia. As an aphantasia researcher, I think this brings in another element. So
Yeah.
aphantasia, Mary would say that when she leaves the house and experiences the rose, there is some perceptual encoding possibly in that moment, but she's not able to imagine the rose later because aphantasia says that people can't visualize in their mind's eye.
Yeah.
So in that situation, what's happened to Mary?
It's interesting. I hadn't really thought about aphantasic Mary.
Yeah.
Okay, at first pass, I'd agree. She doesn't, even at this conceptual level of having a new name, know something she didn't know before because she doesn't have this new name. But I'm curious about aphantasia. I'm very aphantasic. I think.
Oh, you are? Interesting.
Well, yeah, it's a complicated subject, and philosophers have started writing about it. And if you ask me on that test, imagine a red apple. I close my eyes, imagine a red apple. Nothing much happens at all.
Yeah.
I really don't. But if you ask me to visually imagine my bedroom downstairs, I can kind of, but it's not in color.
Interesting.
It's more kind
does
of.
Does that mean it's in black and white?
Sensory motor. I mean, I kind of know where everything is in the sense that I can know how I grab things and so on. So and I take it that's some part of visual imagination, but yeah. Anyway, it's complicated.
This is really interesting. I've been fascinated with aphantasia for a while, and I'm doing some independent research for an aphantasia company at the moment. So really digging into the research and loving it. So one thing that they find is that people with aphantasia really feel like they know what their bedroom looks like. It's like, of course I know what my bedroom looks like. It's like this is here, this is here, this is here, but they can't actually generate the visual perception in their mind. But they'll have such strong conviction, they'll feel it in their body that they know it. And their semantic recall can be very good, can be almost completely on par, but autobiographical details actually regenerating that holiday experience, or again, seeing the rose, smelling the rose, touching the rose. They'll have a semantic recall of like, I remember there was a rose, but that actual generation of the perception.
But not. If you're an expert, well, we don't want to get too sidetracked, but I think it's very sensitive to exactly how the tests are done. Now I think about it, with my eyes open,
yes,
I think I can visually imagine the white duvet cover in my bedroom, and it would be different to imagine a green duvet cover. I kind of feel that I'm imagining the colors. But if you ask me to close my eyes and recreate them in my head, nothing happens. So is that consistent with your research?
Yeah, I think there's mixed results on eyes open versus eyes closed. Different studies have tried to. More research definitely needs to be done here. But I believe that they have eyes open. They can have slightly better generative. I'm vaguely recalling if they're in an fMRI, eyes open, you get sort of more of the picture in their visual cortex than they would eyes closed. So you can kind of decode it very, very roughly. If you imagine a circle, eyes open, you can see very rough neural decoding. Although it's noisier, it's less exact.
I see. Yeah. That's interesting. And so when one can do the brain imaging for shapes, presumably one can't do it for colors because we don't really know where to look for colors.
Exactly. So. Shapes are easy, and general faces and scenes and things like this we generally do. Like the VVIQ is the vividness imagery score, is generally scenes and faces, and I think it's fascinating, and I think it does.
This is weird. You're saying that my visual imagination of an absent scene is better when my eyes are open and I have an actual scene in front of me than if I close my eyes and I've cleared the space to imagine the absent scene.
I don't know if we'd be able to say that outright.
Yeah,
I don't know, because there's so much.
It's what it feels like to me, and that's
If I'm remembering right, I think there's slightly better generation with eyes open, but I don't it's very heterogeneous. I think
Yeah,
there's probably lots of, like you said, you can picture the white duvet, but could you wrap it around your arm? Can you feel it? Can you feel the texture? Can you feel the warmth? Can you actually feel the experience of wrapping that duvet around your arm?
no, of course not.
See, I definitely can.
My God, so I knew about tactile
See,
imagination.
aphantasia is multimodal, so over 50% experience deficits in all of their other sensory system as well. So taste, touch, smell.
Yeah, no, I don't think I'm strong on taste and touch, and
that would be common. Do you
yeah,
dream?
Yeah, I dream, and I can dream in color as well.
So about 65% of people with aphantasia dream very vividly, which again I find very interesting. We're definitely getting sidetracked, but I find this interesting.
Yeah, and isn't the weirdest thing that nobody knew about these interpersonal differences?
Right.
I mean, that's kind of very strange that, you know.
Well, it's fascinating. It seems like people with aphantasia have developed really strong verbal and conceptual strategies to solve problems where you would expect an imagination is required. So if you ask them to, like, how many windows do you have in your house, which is a common one, they'll just kind of use raw logic to go through it, and they're very good at that. And the strategy can often be as effective, but a little bit slower. And spatial memory seems completely unaffected, which is weird. Spatial memory might be just a different visual stream, but they don't seem to have any issue with mental rotation tasks. Again, seems like imagination is intimately necessary for mental rotation, but they don't seem to have any issues with that.
Yeah. So I mean, as I said when I first said that, I can imagine the layout of my room. It's very much sensory motor. I mean,
yes.
I can see how I'm going to, and so anything like that. And I imagine mental rotation is also quite close to the motor cortex. And I don't think I'm deficient in that. But we better stop. We better stop. Sorry to.
Well, I think it's a really fun,
away from
as equally interesting a rabbit hole as any other. But sure, we can hop back to it. Did you want to touch more on fundamental consciousness, or move on?
I'll fill out the argument in favor of dualism, the standard argument in philosophy, and it's called the conceivability argument, the zombie argument. But I won't put it like that. I'll put it differently. So the response to the Mary argument is to say, look, what's going on in cases like that is that they're highlighting the existence of phenomenal concepts, ways of thinking about experience, not as it were from the outside, looking into the brain, looking at the brain processes, but thinking of them at first hand in terms of what it's like. You recreate them in imagination, and you think of them subjectively. And the materialists say, look, these are just two different ways of thinking about the same brain state. It's kind of like thinking about it from the outside, thinking about having it, but they're both ways of thinking about the same state. Okay. Dave Chalmers has been running an argument that involves that doesn't really work. The idea that there's two concepts for the same thing and you don't know necessarily just in virtue of having the concepts that they refer to the same thing. He says that doesn't work for phenomenal concepts. Phenomenal concepts are special in that they kind of refer directly to their object. When you think about the red experience in terms of what it's like, you're kind of glomming straight onto the nature of the experience in a way perhaps that the physical way of thinking doesn't. And because you're glomming straight onto the nature of the experience, your phenomenal thinking about the experience ought to show you that it's physical, if it's physical. When we think about experiences in terms of what they're like, or even when we introspect experiences when we're having them, we're kind of revealing the nature of the experiences to ourselves. And I mean, it's now called in literature, phenomenal thinking is revelatory. It's we have the nature of the experiences revealed. And if they were physical brain processes, then it would be revealed to us in introspection that they're physical brain processes. But it's not, so they can't be. So that's another argument. That's a very standard argument now in philosophy.
And are they always subjective? Is phenomenological experience is always definitionally subjective?
Phenomenal thinking is thinking about experiences introspectively, or perhaps in imagination, in the way Mary does. After she's seen the red rose, she kind of remembers imaginatively what it was like. And the idea is that when we think about that experience in that way, we're thinking about it directly in a way that doesn't put any kind of description or ancillary information between your thinking and the thing itself. And so the thought is, because introspective thinking is so direct, it shows you what experiences are like. And if they were complicated neural oscillations, it would show you that, but it doesn't, so they can't be. I mean, that's you might not look that kind of gobsmacked by this argument, but that's quite widely endorsed in contemporary philosophy of consciousness. And I mean, it's a pretty intuitive idea. I mean, you do think that when you're having an experience and you introspect the experience, you're having a pain, you're seeing something red, you introspect the experience, you kind of, the experience is right there before your mind. How is there room for you to be mistaken about its nature? That's the thought. And okay, I can't make it any more convincing than that. I mean, of course, a materialist will say, no. I mean, why suppose that introspection is going to show you that it's a brain process just because it is? Introspection isn't so magical as that. And that's where I get off that bus. But yeah, I should say something. This is by way of digression, a bit of sociological explanation. In philosophy, you get kind of little subcultures, and they're the people who work, say, on religion, and they tend to be religious, and they're the people who work on perception, and they tend to be very interested in the magic of perception, and they're people who work on consciousness, and they tend to be disinclined to be materialists. And so this revelation argument is probably the majority of papers being written about the philosophy of consciousness in philosophy now are engaged with that. And I just this doesn't mean that it's a particularly compelling premise. It's more that it's a premise that's interesting to people who are interested in consciousness because they're unhappy with materialism.
Okay.
Yeah. End of sociological digression.
Why
to proper argument?
Why do you think we haven't come up with a definition? Why haven't we defined what consciousness is through democratic process? We get 10 people to come up with their best definition. Everyone relevant votes on it, and that's our definition for consciousness. Because it's a bit annoying that we don't have a definition, and every podcast we have to go through the everyone's unique definition, where it seems like we could define it, and then maybe experiments might have any hope of building on each other or actually talking about the same thing.
Okay, so let's move on to this issue. So I take it that the last discussion we've had since I gave you the argument for consciousness, then you asked me, are there any good arguments against consciousness? And we've been to the Mary argument, and we've been to the kind of follow-on thought that phenomenal thinking, introspective thinking is revelatory. Okay, draw a line.
Yes.
And now we can start thinking about scientific research into consciousness, or just attempts to define consciousness, kind of pin down its nature. And yeah, so, well, how do you think we should go about this? There are lots of theories of consciousness, aren't there? I mean, you said definitions, but let's just call them theories for the moment. We'll come back to definition in a minute. So there's higher order theories of consciousness. The state is only conscious if there's another mental state that's about the first state, that your experiences of consciousness, because you can think about your experiences. That's a quite a popular view among philosophers. And then there's global workspace theories of consciousness, that there's kind of all information comes in, and then there's a place where it's kind of pooled and it's available to all kind of different peripheral systems, and the stuff in the global workspace is conscious. And then there's, I don't know, reentrant loop theories of consciousness, that kind of corticothalamic resonance loops. That's what's constitutive of consciousness. And then there's integrated information theory, and among philosophers, it's representational theories of consciousness. Okay, these are all perfectly materialist accounts. I mean, there's nothing anti-materialist about these accounts, but they're all very different. And you might think of them as, some of them set the bar for consciousness very high. I mean, only adult humans are conscious if you have a higher order theory of consciousness. Animals, babies probably aren't conscious. Or if you're an integrated information theory person, I don't know, I haven't really looked at it very hard, but probably bacteria got a good chance of being conscious. And
I was curious to ask where you draw your line. I ask most guests this, if they have in their head, where do you think that all, and again, it depends on the definition, which is why I'm frustrated we don't have one, but do you think all biological living organisms are conscious?
I'd rather postpone answering that question for a little while.
Okay.
And focus first on the methodological issue of how we might decide which of the different theories that I've described is the correct theory.
Okay.
Okay, so these are different theories about what kinds of brain processes, which brain processes are constitutive of consciousness, which brain processes are necessary and sufficient for consciousness. You have consciousness if and only if you have these kind of brain processes, right? Right. That's what these theories are. And there's you're conscious if and only if X, and there's a number of different suggestions for X, right? And the science of consciousness looks at this as if it were some kind of empirical question. We're going to do research to figure out which of these theories is true. And okay, how do you think that research might go? How are we going to do it?
You write up a grant application with a bunch of hypotheses on how you're going to try and falsify some idea. You get a bunch of money, you run the experiments, adjust, pivot, apply for another grant.
But what are the experiments? I mean, suppose you're doing experiments on, what's a case that might be quite fish, right? I'm going to do experiments on fish, right? To see whether, fish don't have much of a brain. They're not bad. They're vertebrates. I don't know much about fish brains. What do fish have in the way of?
I think
they won't have cortices. I mean, because fish are ancestors of birds and reptiles and all kinds of things that don't have cortices. So they must have something much more primitive. Anyway, okay, we're going to do research on fish to figure out if they.
You can see the rough. I think you can see the rough morphology in fish, not exactly as developed, but I believe they have. They'll have a hypothalamus, or sort of a primitive hypothalamus, which sort of regulates their hormone system and their most basic sort of primitive nervous system. They do have a
Right.
frontal cortex, I believe, of some sort. Again, the rough sort of morphology is there.
They're going to have something. They're going to have a central nervous system, and
Yeah.
so. But what are you going to do? I mean, how are you going to find out if they're conscious? Right? You prick them. They writhe around a bit. Is that just an unconscious reaction, or is it conscious? Man, what is going to tell you?
Well, this is why I find a definition important, because we keep saying, like, is it conscious, without us even realizing amongst us what we mean by that. So it seems to me that what comes before a theory is a definition. And then you scaffold your experiments from that definition, how you might test different aspects of it. Now, maybe that's wrong, and maybe it's hard to do that now because we have so many theories. But and maybe if
So suppose I say, right, I'm defining consciousness, and let's all agree about this definition. Consciousness is activity in a global workspace, right?
I have a lot of issues. I don't think that definition is going to get voted in by the parliament.
You don't like that definition? Look, in philosophy, there is discussion of the definition, and Ned Block wrote a very famous paper on a confusion about the function of consciousness. Very misleading title, but very important and influential paper. I mean, addressing just this issue, and he wanted to take raised question. He wanted to object to people who define consciousness pretty much in just the way I did. That he didn't talk about global work, so he talked about access consciousness.
Yes,
there are people who think of consciousness in terms of states that are available for reasoning and motor control, and in organisms with speech for reports of mental states. He said some people want to define consciousness as that. And he said, no, that's not the right way to set about this project. What we're really interested in is something that needs to be defined differently. And he called that phenomenal consciousness. And he said phenomenal consciousness. And then he starts saying, well, if you're going to ask me what it is, well, it's like Louis Armstrong. If you're going to ask me what jazz is, you're never going to know. If you're going to ask me what consciousness is, well, you're never going to know. I mean, you shouldn't be asking. It's something that we all know about. We all know about consciousness in our own case. And then when in the paper, I can quote, because I mean, I have strong views about all this. He says, I cannot define phenomenal consciousness in any remotely non-circular way. It's just states that are like something. And he says, all we can do is point to the states that we know in our own case to be phenomenally conscious. So, point to your visual experiences and your pain and your feeling of depression and so on. You know those to be conscious. It's states like those. So he kind of set up this undefined notion of phenomenal consciousness. And then he said, right, now we've got a kind of definition. That's our concept of consciousness. And then we have to do scientific research to find out which brain processes, or which physical processes generally, constitute phenomenal consciousness so understood. And okay, that seems fine so far. And so now the idea is, well, we will look at cases of phenomenal consciousness and see whether they are all characterized by being states in the global workspace, or all characterized by involving corticothalamic loops, or all characterized by higher order thought, or so on. So, yeah. And And if you think about a lot of consciousness research, that's how it goes. It goes well when it's conducted in humans. I mean, if you're working with fish, even if you're working with monkeys, you poke them, you flash stimuli at them, they do things, they don't do things, and now you can't ask them, was that conscious, because they can't tell you. But with humans, you can flash them a visual stimulus for 10 milliseconds, and then you can say, was that conscious? You can I don't know, you can do all kinds of interesting things. You can give them morphine when they got a pain, and after they've had the morphine, are you still conscious of the pain? Yes, they'll tell you, yes, we're still conscious of the pain. It doesn't bother me anymore, but we're still conscious. You can get people who've got their ventral stream lesions and get them to put things through orientated slots, and then you can ask them, were they conscious of the slot? And they'll say, no, I wasn't conscious. So you can kind of, with human beings, kind of use this, you subject them very stimuli, you see what's going on in their brain, and then you say, were you conscious? Were you not conscious? And you can use this to try and pin down which activities in human brains which kind of activities are always present when people say they're conscious and always absent when they say they're not conscious. And you might by that means try to establish which brain processes, in humans at least, are necessary and sufficient for consciousness. And that's the kind of default way of conducting empirical research.
So the neural correlates of consciousness approach.
Yeah, so
that hasn't yielded that many results.
Consciousness is operationalized by asking people, were you conscious in this respect? Were you not conscious? If they say yes, then that's a positive instance. If they say no, it's a negative instance. And you hope by that means to pin down necessary and sufficient condition for consciousness. And that's, yeah.
What are your thoughts on that approach?
There's two kinds of worry. One is that it's rather the methodology rather weights the scales in favor of equating consciousness with access consciousness, because we're kind of getting it's a positive case if people report it, and a negative case if people report that they're not conscious. So we're relying on people's reports. So we're kind of predetermined to end up finding out that consciousness coincides with just the things that people can report. And you might wonder, well, where did that come from? And they said, we don't want to presuppose that consciousness is to do with availability for report. And you might well wonder, look, this activity in the dorsal stream that's guiding people's hand movements, that they say is not conscious. How do we know it's really not conscious? Just because they say it's not conscious, maybe something's gone with their ability, wrong with their ability to report it, not with its actually being conscious. So that's one kind of. So in the consciousness research, there's people try and use something called a no report paradigm. They kind of try and get signs of something being conscious from uncontroversial cases, and then it's not clear that get around the problem. So one worry about that methodology is that it weighs the scales in favor of high bar for consciousness. It's got to be something that's available to humans to report. To my mind, a rather more serious worry is that there's going to be too many things that are common to all the states that humans report as conscious. There's you can probably construct a number of different accounts of what constitutes consciousness that's consistent with that methodology. So suppose there are these states which in humans are available for report. That's one thing. I mean, they seem to coincide with when people feel they're conscious, but also those states will involve certain kinds of corticothalamic loops. Also, those states will involve certain kinds of susceptibility to learning, to associationist learning. And now, so you might say, look, I'll give you a number of X's, each of which is necessarily insufficient for people to report things as being conscious. Whenever people report things as being conscious, it involves certain kinds of corticothalamic loops. Whenever people report things as being conscious, it involves availability in a global workspace. Whenever people report things as being conscious, these are the kinds of states that enter into certain kinds of associationist learning. Okay, and now you have a problem that when we move to other animals,
yes,
say birds say, they ain't got no corticothalamic loops because they ain't got a cortex, they've got a pallium, but they can do the associationist learning fine. Is that enough to make them conscious? I mean, do we say it was this learning powers that makes the state conscious? Or do we say, no, it was a special kind of realization in terms of corticothalamic loops, which is something that's consistent with the research on humans? And
it's a good point.
And I don't think there's any real way of getting around this problem. The trouble is you're going to have too many candidates for which brain processes constitute consciousness, which aspects of our brain processes constitute consciousness if you focus on humans. And when we move to other organisms, you'll find some of those aspects present and others absent, and we don't know which of them. We want some test cases. We want some test cases where we have the associationist learning and not the corticothalamic loops. And we want to be able to, let's go to one of those cases and see whether we still have consciousness. And the truth is, we have the test cases. We can go to the birds. They can do the learning all right, don't have the cortex. But unfortunately, they can't tell us whether they're conscious or not.
Right.
We're really stymied.
I think it's reasonable by virtue of human consciousness. If we think about consciousness as an adapted evolutionary tool, as a control system. So human consciousness is controlling a human body. So it's not necessarily maybe unreasonable to assume that human consciousness has a feature that fish consciousness doesn't have, because human consciousness is a control property for a human body, whereas fish consciousness is specific to controlling a fish body. So we sort of do need definitions that what the hell consciousness is across all of living systems if we're going to say that both fish, plants, bacteria, and humans are conscious, but also realize that each of those might have unique and specific features that are relevant to that organism.
Okay, that's fine. Let me give you an analogy and see. Suppose we were studying not consciousness, but intelligence or creativity. I mean, I say these because I've been to talks partly prompted by AI developments about whether large language models are intelligent, whether they're creative. And but let's leave the AI systems to one side, at least for now.
We'll
And
tackle it later, yeah.
okay, we'll do intelligence, right? And now somebody's saying, okay, look, let's try and figure out, okay, we can agree humans are intelligent, at least most of them, but monkeys pretty intelligent. Birds, birds surprisingly intelligent. I mean, often they beat the monkeys, and octopus is pretty good, and now fish. Well, some fish can do some pretty clever things. I just want to digress. So I discovered something recently which really freaked me out. I got a book. What's it called? What a Fish Knows. I mean, I'm rather interested in fish, and fish experience the Muller-Lyer illusion.
I did actually know that. That's so cool. I did, yeah.
Isn't it so weird? Anyway, sorry, I just wanted to chuck that in because it's such a weird fact. And
I love optical illusions, so feel free to throw any optical illusion examples at me, and especially if it's a bizarre animal experiencing that optical illusion, love it. It's so interesting to me.
So when it comes,
I'll put the Muller-Lyer illusion on the screen for people who don't know what that is. It's where the lines look like they're different lengths but aren't because of the sort of the surrounding context.
Okay, I can't do it with my hand, but so it's very weird because we're supposed to think that it's to do with our experience of corners in rooms, and so the lines, the corners like this make the thing seem closer to you, and the corners the other way around make it seem further away. And why would fish know about that? I mean,
that doesn't track with fish.
That can't be the right explanation. And
yeah.
Anyway, let's get back to intelligence. Now, of course, we'll say, look, artificial intelligence, this is kind of not a sensible question. It's like what you said. Look, I mean, there's different levels of intelligence. We'll find some kind of intelligence in fish. You might even think, bacteria have a certain kind of intelligence. Slime molds rather, they can do kind of interesting things. They have kind of memory of some kind and so on. But we don't think there's any substantial issue about where should we draw the line when it comes to intelligence. There's just different degrees of intelligence, and it would be silly to feel that we need an answer to whether fish are really intelligent, right?
Yeah.
But when it comes to consciousness, many people will feel it's no good to take the same view. I mean, it's not a matter that, well, we have a lot of consciousness and fish have a bit less, and bacteria have. People feel, no, there's a definite cutoff point. I mean, either a light is on or it's not. I mean,
yes.
We take it, we'll leave the panpsychists out of it, and even the panpsychists, actually, now I think about it, agree that stones are not conscious, tables are not conscious. Most people will think that bacteria are just not conscious. There's nobody at home. There's no what is likeness for a bacteria.
Yeah.
And then they really want to know, are fish conscious? I mean, are worms conscious? Probably not. They don't have much of a central nervous system, but the fish do. I mean, are fish conscious? I mean, is it something that it's like to be a fish? People think there's a substantial question there. Now, what do you think?
I think yes.
You think yes?
So I follow.
You think it's not like intelligence then?
First off, it's a very, very wide spectrum. And to say that fish and humans are on the same spectrum doesn't say that human consciousness shares a lot in common with fish consciousness.
No.
I really think of it as an organism integrating its state in relation to its environment, and that subjective experience, in the same way you just think consciousness just is what that feeling of brain process is. I think that's subjectivity, and the experience of consciousness just is the integration of a number of features. So a good example that Peter Godfrey Smith lays out.
I like what you're saying, but it makes me feel that consciousness is akin to intelligence. and it shouldn't be thought of in terms of a light being on.
Well, there's clearly a light at some point, which is weird because I'm not willing to say a rock is conscious, but I am willing to say that probably a plant is to a tiny, 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 tiny degree. And so
look, okay. Let me put my cards on the table.
Yeah.
Because you come to, I mean, it's what you just said about plants that made me feel like this. So I'm inclined to think that consciousness is like intelligence. It's not a useless notion, but it's kind of a bit loose and vague. And when it comes to intelligence, it would be silly to have a big debate about whether fish are intelligent. I mean, we can go down the evolutionary. Yeah, are jawless fish intelligent? Are earthworms intelligent? And it's silly to start kind of thinking we've got to solve this problem, right?
Yes.
With consciousness, people feel rather different, right? They feel no, there's a cutoff point. There's a point where the light comes on, and below that, there's no light at all. It's just like being a stone. I think they're misguided. I think that they're being driven by this intuition of dualism that I was talking about early on. They think that consciousness is something extra to all kinds of physical brain processes, and they want to know where this extra thing comes into play. If you throw away the extra thing, then I think consciousness is like intelligence. It's just rather what you said, a matter of having an integrated body, probably having sense organs, reacting to environment, behaving appropriately in a kind of organized body-wide way, and there's no real cutoff point.
Yes. Within biological systems, anyway, because with outside of biological systems,
okay,
I'm not willing to give that. I'm not willing to push them onto the spectrum just yet.
No. So we're in biological systems, but look, here's an analogy we haven't talked about yet. I've got an analogy between consciousness and intelligence, but one could also have an analogy between consciousness and life. That's a rather interesting analogy.
Yes.
And in the old days, people used to think that life involved something extra, a vital spirit, just like people think consciousness, I mean, implicitly, I think mistakenly, involves something extra, some non-physical extra kind of aura, light kind of thing. And kind of nobody really thinks that anymore. Enough is understood about the difference between living and non-living systems that we don't need a vital spirit. They're just all physical systems. But there is a pretty sharp cutoff point even so with life. I mean, we don't feel that it's like intelligence. It's just a kind of vague thing that comes in different degrees. It'd be silly to argue about whether worms are intelligent, but it's not silly to argue about whether worms are alive.
Yeah.
Now, we might. So, what is life? It involves metabolism, using available energy to keep your bodily integrity, and it also involves reproduction. And so we do have some in-between cases. Viruses, they reproduce, but they don't really independently metabolize. Are they alive? People disagree. But I mean, they're kind of on the borderline, but apart from them, there's a pretty sharp cutoff point. And it might be, despite what I've been pushing, that consciousness is another sharp cutoff point.
Yeah.
But I'm rather skeptical. And the way our discussion has gone is it looks like you're regressing to the sharp cutoff point given by life and not particularly aiming for a different cutoff point that's constituted by the light of consciousness coming on. Because you wanted to say that, What do you feel about that bacteria? You had plants.
Yeah. So, like, no one. So bacteria have sensors, and maybe they have memory. So I think there's some experimental evidence that something has memory and that has sensors. Like, it's interacting with its environment in some sort of chemotactic way. It's getting chemicals.
Yeah.
And I think that once a bacteria senses, like, the actual physical chemical touches the receptor of the bacteria, and it's integrating that information in however many features it's integrating, is giving it a subjective readout of that bacteria in that moment. That's consciousness for me. That's the light turning on. And I even think you could go one step further, where you might be able to get some measurement of how much consciousness it has based on how many features it's integrating. I think the integration is key here. Humans are integrating billions of things every time anything happens.
Okay,
Tell me if you disagree with any of that.
I don't especially want to disagree with any of that, because as I just said, I think life, being alive, not being alive, is a pretty sharp cutoff point. And it does kind of involve a point of view. I mean, living systems kind of by their nature pretty much need to have some kind of boundary, some kind of membrane. They've got to be distinguishing.
Exactly.
Selves and other. I mean, maybe there's the viruses and the slime molds. They don't really have a boundary, but I mean, they're very marginal as to whether they're alive. And I mean, people would be happy about them being borderline. But note that you aren't giving us consciousness as another line in nature apart from being alive. You're just pointing out that anything that's alive kind of has a point of view. You might, in this line of thought, kind of happily distinguish between, well, I don't know.
Well, to counter a little bit on the live,
you might want to say, look, plants, they're different. They well, I mean, I'm going to say something that's disputable, but they kind of don't act in the same way that animals do. They don't have sense organs. They kind of have a different mode of operation. They stay still.
I think I don't. I kind of slept.
Yeah.
I sort of slept through my botany lectures in college, so I don't think I know enough about plants to really give a, like, I would be sympathetic to the idea, and I think someone that knows a lot more about this might be able to convince me. Like, I definitely wouldn't say it's a crazy idea to say that plants are conscious. I just don't know enough. Bacteria, I'm like, I think it's hard to make an argument that it's not. But where it gets weird for me, and where my opinion maybe has changed, is with AI.
Let's come back. But
let's just go to that.
We've got the bacteria, we've got the plants. You might say that multicellular animals are another kind of cutoff point. I don't know enough about bacteria really, but they need to coordinate their activity across their whole bodies. They have more complicated bodies. They pretty quickly need nerve systems to facilitate this coordination. I mean, that's another pretty sharp cutoff point in the biological realm. No, I'm happy about these cutoff points. And if you want to equate consciousness with any of them, I'm not going to especially object to that. What I'm suspicious of is whether there's another cutoff point.
Yes.
Beyond the ones we've just been through. And I think most people in consciousness research business do think there is. They're thinking in terms of a light coming on, where this is different from just being a multicellular organism with a nervous system. I don't know.
I think another one is, I had a conversation with Dr. Michael Levin, and he really changed my views on a lot of these things that.
What?
Where I'm not entirely convinced that my kidney isn't conscious under that definition of integrating its experience in relation to its environment. It has a lot of fibers connecting to it. And again, it in some very strange way has subjective experience. Now, does it have awareness? Depends on what you mean by awareness.
Okay.
But it is integrating its state as a readout of its metabolic wetware, of its substrate in relation to its environment.
Yeah.
And again,
it's very hard to see why,
yeah,
if we're going to allow that, as many people would, that fairly primitive, the most primitive vertebrates, lampreys, are conscious, or why wouldn't you allow that subparts of the human body are conscious? I'm inclined to agree about that. So I'm happy with the way we're going, but I think it's very different from what most philosophers and scientists in the consciousness business have in mind. And go back to Ned Block's kind of very influential founding idea of phenomenal consciousness. That's what we're after. And okay, how do you decide? You know, what's this idea of phenomenal consciousness? Can't define it. It's just point to the states in us that we are aware of as conscious, and we're talking about states like those.
yes,
I think that idea is irredeemably vague. I mean,
yes,
like those in what respects? And as I said, when you look at what's common to those states, we'll find a number of features that are like those, and those features will dissociate in different animals. And when we start, you know, are the octopus's states like ours? Well, they're very different in a lot of ways, but they're similar in some other ways. And, you know, do the differences mean they're not conscious, or the similarities mean they are? I don't think that the program set up by Block's definition of phenomenal consciousness has any way of deciding that. So I think the notion of phenomenal consciousness as set up by the philosophers and the scientists who follow it, that notion is vague. If you want to say, look, let's get away from that, let's get away from starting with the human case, let's just think about what's distinctive about different forms of life, I'm very happy with that.
I think there's a really interesting, Peter Godfrey Smith in his book Other Minds talks about an ant. And I think an ant is really interesting because an ant, like pain is one form of subjective experience, right? Pain, if I punched you and then you punched me, we're not experiencing the same thing. Or if I punched Conor McGregor and he punched me, we're definitely not experiencing the same thing. So it's a subjective experience. So consciousness is involved. You can tear a leg off an ant and it doesn't seem to care. So it doesn't seem to be bothered. So this is where I sort of think about, there's lots
about the ants, because I think there's research on bees.
Yes.
We haven't talked much about insects and other arthropods, but I think the bees do try and ameliorate their pains. And
I believe they do. But as far as I'm remembering from this book, ants don't. And ants do a lot of things that seem automatic, that don't seem conscious, that they can get stuck in doom circles. Well, they'll basically get, I think a large part of their perception is chemotactic. So they can get stuck in like a scent circle and they'll just walk themselves to death. Which is like, doesn't seem like, like that seems like a heuristic based approach. Right. And then myself and Peter Godfrey Smith had a really interesting conversation on like when an organism goes from heuristic rulebook type responses to conscious subjectivity. Like when does I smell chemical in this concentration over here turn right, which is like a rule-based approach, turn to I'm hungry, but I have to do my gym exercise later and I have to go to sleep at 10 o'clock and I don't want the, like it's like, are we just a really complicated rule book that's abstracted away all of the rules in consciousness? Or is there something categorically different between a rule-based approach and a subjective consciousness?
And so what did PGS say? He's my chum. We were colleagues in New York for a while. And
amazing.
I would expect him to be kind of sympathetic to the kinds of things we've been saying in the last 15 minutes or so about consciousness.
Yes. A lot of my ideas, I think, are from reading Other Minds
Yeah.
10 years ago, and going through my conversations with other consciousness researchers. I just like his framework. I think it makes sense from an
Yeah.
evolutionary perspective. I think possibly it's quantifiable in a way. Like, it sounds maybe very difficult now, but it might be possible to actually calculate how many features an organism is integrating into its subjective experience. And that means that we could actually quantify that humans have 9 trillion qualia units, and a plant has 3, and an ant has 75, and a zebra has 80 billion. And, there might be.
He has a 2016 paper,
Yeah.
which, if I'm remembering it right, is a lot about how single-celled organisms can be quite behaviorally complex. I'm not sure whether it's includes bacteria or.
He definitely said he was sympathetic to bacteria being
Yes.
conscious.
Yeah.
Because then you have to, if you say no, you have to kind of justify that. And like, why not? Like, I don't really know if there's anything special about brains per se. It gives you an incredibly rich consciousness.
I think we're being very deflationary about the category of consciousness. And
interesting. I don't think so at all. I think it's marvelously incredible that it's that expansive and that wide. And
it's kind of, there's illusionists about consciousness. I mean,
yeah,
get it to some extent. Keith Frankish, young fellow, Francois Camera, no, very, very smart, sensible people, and they don't think anything different from what we're thinking. But they say, look, in the consciousness business, when people are talking about consciousness, they mean something much more chunky than what we're talking about. They think there's some definite thing, some extra, not maybe they don't want to pin extra on, but some sharp feature, like being warm-blooded or something that is kind of distinctive of certain kinds of organisms, not others. They're accusing the consciousness researchers of not thinking of consciousness like intelligence, something that comes in degrees and kind of goes all the way down the animal chain. And I don't think I disagree with them in substance. I think that most of the consciousness researchers are thinking of consciousness as something which there isn't.
Yeah.
All there is this kind of different degrees of using information to guide your activities. And but I'm not inclined to go with them and say, therefore, there's no consciousness. I don't see why the mistaken kind of people who want to reify consciousness should own the term of consciousness. It's like just because intelligence is something that comes in degrees, goes all the way down the animal chain, isn't a very definite notion. It's a bit of a loose notion. I'm not inclined to say, therefore, there's no intelligence. That seems overreacting. So, but apart from wanting to say, look, yeah, sure, there's consciousness. I mean, who would deny that different systems are conscious? I think we're being very deflationary. We're not that different from the illusionists.
What's the exact illusionist claim? I'm not sure I fully understand exactly what flag stake they're making.
There's no phenomenal consciousness, but this is partly a term. They say that most people who think about consciousness are thinking about it as something that's extra to access, extra to using information to guide your behavior. They think that most people are thinking about consciousness are thinking in dualist terms. They think that in most people's mouths, the word consciousness means something non-physical.
Some secret sauce.
That's a simple way to understand illusionists. And they said it was an illusion to think there's anything non-physical, so we're illusionists about consciousness. That's what you people are talking about consciousness mean. You mean something non-physical, and that's just a mistake.
So it's perfectly coherent with materialism. Is that right?
What?
Like illusionism is perfectly coherent with materialism.
Oh yes, no, they're motivated by materialism.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, their thought is because materialism is true, there isn't any this extra thing that most people think there is. Yeah. I mean, here's another thing that they think most people think that you and I don't seem to think. They think that within the realm of living organisms, there's a cutoff point between the ones that are conscious and the ones that aren't. And,
right.
They think insofar as you build that into your notion of consciousness, there's no consciousness because there isn't a cutoff point. But yeah, no, it's the differences between illusionists and what we're thinking is mainly rhetorical. It's kind of, yeah. Now, think of them like this. They're people, imagine that there were people in the 19th century who came to the view that there's no vital spirit. And they said, look, you people all think that life involves some extra vital spirit, that constitutively life means the extra vital spirit. Let me tell you, there isn't any life in that sense. I mean, of course, there's a big difference between the systems that metabolize and so on, the ones that don't, but it's not life in the sense of having some extra vital spirit.
Right.
And, that's what the illusionist is saying about consciousness.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
What do you think about this Mysterianism idea that the human brain didn't evolve to understand consciousness, that there was no evolutionary utility in it understanding, and it's just it could be fully material, but it's just something it's just a 5-dimensional concept that the brain doesn't have the neural networks to understand itself?
I think that's a counsel of despair. Why? I mean, we've been talking. It's not like we feel that we've run into some problem that's just too hard for us to deal with.
I would agree, but it's hard to beat on a logical grounds, right? Why would the brain necessarily understand itself?
Why not? I mean, look, the brain is very complex, and there's certain respects in which it's very hard to understand. I mean, yeah, but we weren't talking about understanding the workings of the brain, and you might feel that understanding the workings of the brain, that's a challenge that is going to be too hard for human beings, just because the brain is unbelievably complicated machine, and all the attempts to understand it involves all kinds of simplifications that obscure the real workings of the brain. There's a rather good book just won the Lakatos Prize that I'm just trying to remember the title of, that argues just that about the human brain, and then generalizes to the inability of science to get at the nature of things generally. And my response to the book is, this book might be right about the human brain, very complicated thing, but it doesn't mean that science in general never gets at the nature of other things. But
yes.
but the question, McGinn, the other Mysterians, is not that we can't understand the brain and we can't understand physical processes, we can't understand consciousness and the relation of consciousness to the brain. I'm afraid I think that, again, they're motivated by implicit dualism. Look, one thing we haven't mentioned is the explanatory gap.
Yes.
The idea that we rarely have a puzzle explaining why, and I'm going to have trouble putting it in neutral, why the brain gives rise to consciousness. And so I think all that kind of talk is, if consciousness just is the brain, certain kind of brain processes, then there's nothing to explain. We don't have to explain why H2O gives rise to water. I mean, water is H2O. There's nothing to explain. We don't have to explain why Cary Grant is Archie Leach. They're the same thing. There's nothing to explain.
Yes.
It's only if you have two things, then you want to explain why the one goes with other. In particular, if you think there's some extra kind of magic aura or light that comes on when certain brain processes happen, if you're thinking in dualist terms, then there really is a puzzle. Why is it that certain brain processes magically give rise to the extra thing? Why exactly is it that some brain processes do this and other ones don't? Why exactly is it in just these cases that we get the extra thing? If you're a dualist, you faced all kinds of explanatory challenges, but those challenges aren't there if you're a clear-thinking materialist. And I think the Mysterians are kind of assuming dualism and then realizing that there's all kinds of horrible explanatory puzzles that arise once you're a dualist. But there's nothing mysterious if you follow the right materialist way.
No, I like it. I do like it. It seems to me, at least what came to my mind was that it's cohesive with IIT as well, integrated information theory, in the sense that what that theory says is that consciousness just is integrated information. There isn't an extra sauce. There isn't any magic. That's simply what it is. The integration is consciousness. It sort of seems to be what you're saying.
Well, yes. No, I'm kind of happy with that, but note how low it's setting the bar for consciousness, and it kind of looks like it's talking about something different from what most people have in mind in the philosophy or science consciousness business. But so much the worse for what those people have in mind. I'm happy with IIT in itself.
Are you happy to wrap a bow on that and move to AI? Because I'm really curious on your opinions there, and we're getting into the later stage of the podcast, and I'm not sure how many opinions you have on AI if we need a bit of time to flesh it out. But this is obviously one of the most topical conversations around consciousness at the moment. Is what GPT number is going to give a damn? I just spoke to Mark Solms. I like that framing. When will a machine give a damn?
Yes. When will it give a damn? Do you think that's the same as when will it be conscious? If
it's a genuine damn and it's not just impersonating a human emotion, if it genuinely gives a damn, as the way I'm defining it, then I would say that's conscious.
So no, I don't see any barrier to AI systems being conscious. I mean, I don't think large language models yet are pretty close to that. I mean, they need to have goals and projects, and need to do better reasoning than large language models can do. I mean, I'm not so fussed about them having sense organs. I mean, there's a kind of line of thought that their words aren't meaningful because they're not grounded in sensory contact with reality.
Right.
Look, 99.99% of my words are meaningful, but not grounded in my sensory contact with reality. We're part of a huge linguistic community, and we get our meaningfulness by being part of the community. I don't have a problem with large language models being meaningful in that way. But one issue you might worry about much more is they're not having bodies, right? I mean, you could have, think about social companions being produced by AI companies. I mean, you can have a kind of girlfriend who's a large language model plus, and you might get quite involved with them. But in truth, they would be a whole lot of, I hesitate to say software because these are deep neural nets, not standard computer programs, but they're distributed over a whole range of servers all over the world. They shunt bits of information around and so on. I mean, this thing that you're in love with isn't actually anywhere. It can be easily duplicated. It can be it can be paused for 100 years and then turned on again. I mean, there'll be all kinds of respects in which these systems are not anything like biological organisms. And so that makes me think hard about, in what sense is this a thing that's conscious? But
Yes.
yeah, I don't know. One thing we haven't talked about, and quite a lot of my interest in the things we have been talking about is involved with this, is which kinds of systems are deserving of moral concern. Which kind of systems should we worry about their welfare, their treatment?
I just spoke with a Dr. Thomas Metzinger, who in 2021 basically said that we should need to have a huge moratorium on AI because we're going to create all of this digital suffering.
Yeah. And no, it's a serious issue, but now notice that it's also an issue when it comes to animals, and the position we kind of gravitated towards with respect to animal consciousness doesn't help us with that.
Right. It's quite arbitrary.
Most people think, look, animals are deserving of moral consideration. They're moral patients. They should have moral standing to the extent they're conscious. I mean, if I don't know, lampreys aren't conscious, then you can treat them how you like. If ants aren't conscious, you can treat them how you like. If bees are conscious, then we should worry about their welfare. But we've kind of spread consciousness so wide that that's not going to help us. I don't think we need to worry about the welfare of bacteria. I don't think we need to worry about the welfare of plants. I don't actually think we need to worry about the welfare of ants. I'm not so sure about bees. But look, one interesting thing is that it's not a good way to answer the question of who we ought to worry about to ask, are they conscious? We've agreed that we aren't going to draw a line about consciousness in anything like the morally significant place.
Yes.
So the welfare depends on what kind of mental organization and sophistication they have. And I think we should address the moral welfare question without asking about consciousness at all. I think consciousness is a red herring when it comes to thinking about moral welfare. It depends on the psychological sophistication, the extent to which they have projects, the extent to which they care for each other, and all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of orthogonal to whether they're conscious.
It's interesting because you mentioned there we make decisions on animal welfare based on consciousness. I don't know if I fully agree. I think it's a lot more arbitrarily societally drawn. Like, do people make arguments that cows are less conscious than dogs, yet we're very willing to have one be factory farmed and shuttled off in buses and eaten, and then we don't touch the other? I don't know if that's the consciousness question.
Look, you might... No, people are worried about the welfare of cows, precisely, and quite rightly. I mean, they're quite rightly worried about the welfare of cows. I mean, they will think, and I don't think this is necessarily the right way to ground it, that's to do with cows being conscious. I mean, it's true that they're happy to kill them to eat them.
Yes.
And you might worry about killing cows because you're taking away their future. I mean, they will have relationships to other cows and their offspring and so on. And so, but everybody's unhappy about factory farming cows, or at least they ought to be, because they think they're conscious. But anyway, it's not the case that people don't worry about the welfare of cows, even though they think they're conscious. They do worry about the welfare of cows. Perhaps they don't worry about it enough. No, people don't like factory farming cows, leaving them in.
Yes.
People don't like factory farming chickens. That's all fine. But they think that when it comes to the difficult cases, like, say, crabs, is it all right to factory farm crabs, which people do in not particularly pleasant conditions? They think, okay, the issue here is, are the crabs conscious?
And cook them alive, right? That's something you see a lot with lobsters and crabs, is just being dropped into boiling water while alive.
I think that's banned now, quite rightly, because
Yeah.
the
Well, I just came back from Thailand. They follow a different set of rules over there.
yeah. Well, I mean, the crabs and the lobsters turn out to be pretty smart, and but look, when we try to figure out where was the consciousness line, we didn't find a good place. We were pretty happy to allow bacteria to be conscious, but which I'm happy about. But I don't think we ought to worry about the moral welfare of bacteria just because we think they're, in the sense we agreed, conscious. We need some different basis for deciding which organisms are deserving of moral welfare, apart from asking whether they're conscious. And I think the same thing applies to AI systems. We're going to get ourselves in a twist if we say, oh, come on, we've got to figure out whether they're conscious, and then we'll know whether we have to treat them respectfully. I think we should just decide on the basis of how smart and interesting and sophisticated they are, whether we ought to treat them respectively, and leave the consciousness issue out of it. So I'm rather with Metzinger that
it's a tough one.
This is a serious issue, but I don't want to muddle it up with the issue about consciousness.
It's a tough one. So, yeah, I'm perfectly willing to extend that biological spectrum across the line with consciousness, but it feels different when you're on electrical circuit boards in AI.
Yeah.
Is anything capable? Yeah, I don't know what the foundational criteria should be when we start caring about it. I think it kind of has to care about itself, and what that would mean, I'm not too sure. But
okay, but
is suffering possible without
to be tied to consciousness? Look, I think consciousness is so much harder.
Yes.
And we're going to get distracted. I mean, look, here's the classic example. Star Trek, New Generation, Commander Data. There's an episode, is it okay to chop him up for used parts because he's just a machine? And now, philosophers think it's really an open question whether Commander Data is conscious, because it's possible our being conscious depends on our being made of meat, and Commander Data is made of silicon chips. So maybe he's not conscious. Philosophers think maybe he is, maybe he's not. We can't be sure. So we can't be sure whether it's okay to cut him up for spare parts, because it would be fine if he's not conscious, and maybe precautionary principle we can't. But yeah. My view is, no, you've got yourself down a rabbit hole here. It's perfectly obvious that you shouldn't be chopping him up for spare parts. He's a nice guy. He's interesting. He's got concerns. That's obvious. And if you have philosophical reasons for thinking he might not be conscious, that's beside the point. So, and I feel that about the AI systems. Now, no. Commander Data's got a body. He's very much like us in that respect. He doesn't raise all the questions about systems that are distributed across all kinds of different servers. But I think this issue is going to come to a head pretty soon. I don't know what Metzinger said. I've known Metzinger a long time. He's fun. He's
great. We had a lovely conversation. Yeah, really fun.
I want to digress a bit. What Metzinger is a real expert on, I don't know if this came up, is out-of-body experience.
It did. I was really interested in this. We talked about it for about 30 minutes because I had one and I was interested in hearing about his experiences and everything. Yeah, that was the first probably 40 minutes. The conversation's coming out soon. I'll link it to you when it's out. It was really fun. We talked about it for probably 45 minutes.
I've heard him describe recipes for giving yourself out-of-body experiences, and I must say I've never been tempted to try.
No?
No.
I like shifting my consciousness in all the ways that I can. I'm intellectually curious in that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm up for that generally, but the other seems a bit step too far for me anyway. But I think so. I think the social companion business. I mean, I'm rather dubious about attempts at AI regulation. I think it's going to be very hard to regulate AI developments without stopping things you don't want to stop. But
Yes.
when it comes to social companions, I think that's an area for regulation. I mean, there's going to be these systems that people kind of become very attached to, fall in love with, that are owned by commercial organizations who can jack up the fees once you're hooked, and I think that ought to be right. But anyway, there are going to be people.
We've already seen this. Did you hear about this? So when GPT-4 was updated to GPT-5, apparently OpenAI got a swarm of emails from people saying that they had destroyed their best friend. Because people had fallen in love. They had just formed connections with the weights of the model of GPT-4. And when GPT-5 came in with a different personality, they were like, this is a different person, or this is a different model. This isn't my friend.
So I don't think we're many years off what will be kind of a crisis, a moral crisis. There's going to be people who are convinced that these companions are deserving of moral concern, and they won't want to upset their own and they won't want other people upsetting their they'll think that people shouldn't be allowed to mistreat these systems. And
so that's an interesting flipping. That's a really interesting flip for me. So you think that the value in that we should care about these systems because other people do. It's not about an arbitrary definition of consciousness.
So far, I haven't expressed a view about whether these people who have these concerns are right or not, because there'll be other people who say this is completely ridiculous. These are just the autocomplete devices. They're no smarter than a thermostat. I mean, just kind of what are you talking about? And there'll be a big dispute. I mean, you can imagine people kind of getting very agitated on both sides, and I mean, there's a very big and difficult kind of meta-ethical issue. I mean, suppose that people who are fully informed understand perfectly well how these systems work, everything about them, they're not deluded at all. They find themselves concerned about what's happening to them. Is there some higher standard that shows that? I mean, is that enough that these kind of natural emotional reactions form concern for these systems? Is that enough to say that they really are deserving of concern? I'm not especially taking a view about that.
I don't know how I feel about that. I'm highly undecided. I don't know how to even start thinking about it.
But people are going to have to think about the issue, because it's going to become a real issue not too long in the future.
I mean, it already is, by what I said. Literally already is.
Advice: do not go down the rabbit hole of asking, are they conscious? That's just muddy water. We just want to get past that and ask, how do they work? What do they do? Do they give a damn? Are they, independent agents? Do they have interests? I mean,
interesting.
Okay. That's what I think about AI.
And do you think that scaling up the current approaches of these LLMs and just giving them more and more data, that we will arrive at a point more and more that people are concerned morally about their suffering? Because that's one that I find that hard to relate to or to resonate with. I don't relate with having any connection with these models in a chat. Like, it's a useful tool for me, highly useful tool. So
I'm rather on the other side about that. I mean,
interesting.
So
that's a really interesting one to me.
Well, look. It's very interesting how kind of informed, right-thinking opinion has evolved on this issue. Kind of the standard view is kind of yours. These are not very interesting systems. They're a long way off being seriously intelligent and creative and goal-directed and so on. That's not my view. I always thought the hard bit was getting systems that can construct coherent sequences of thoughts, of speech, and so on. And look, maybe you're not old enough. I mean, I I grew up with the kind of Chomskyan Fodor classical computationalist tradition
Yes.
that connections machines, no good at all. Real intelligence is kind of digital reasoning and so on. And I take it that large language models have just disproved that.
Yeah.
And within that tradition, it was perfectly clear that computational systems were never going to be able to speak. It was just kind of too hard. I mean, we are much, much better than any computers, right? And then it turned out amazingly. I can remember Henry Shevlin. I don't know him. He's AI lecturer in Cambridge. He's an old friend of mine, and it was 2020, and it was GPT-3, and for the first time, you had a machine that could make intelligent conversation and speak elegant English and completely grammatical and elegant and to the point. And so it was just GPT-3. It wasn't that good actually, but and so I thought, look, this is the main breakthrough. I mean, look, here I am chattering away we're nearly getting to 2 hours now, aren't we? So we're going to have to stop in a bit. Yeah, word after word. How do I do it? Okay. And it's always been a puzzle. I mean, where do all these thoughts come from? And where do all these words come? Well, you might think, well, you form these thoughts, but where do the thoughts come from? And when you look at large language models, there's an obvious answer. We've become very good at choosing an appropriate next word in conversation, and you think, oh God, is that all there was to it?
Right.
But the truth is, one shouldn't belittle that ability. I mean, my ability to choose an appropriate next word is informed by all the things I've read, all the things I've heard, all the past thoughts I've had.
Right.
And it's not a trivial thing to be. I'm not the best next word predictor there ever was, but maybe Shakespeare was just a wonderfully good person for choosing the appropriate next word. But it's not like you had some higher mental process that you used to choose the next word that was appropriate.
Yeah.
It comes out because you're good at choosing. And that turns out to be, to my mind, the thing that explains most of distinctive human abilities. Now, of course, what we've got is something like, idiot savant pub bullshit, or somebody who you fall into conversation, they'll just start chuntering away. They say whatever comes into their head. They got a lot of things to say. They don't worry about whether it's true. They don't think about whether what they're saying is consistent with what they said before. They don't check the facts and so on. But those extra things, that's just kind of easy to add on. I mean, if you think what we do with humans, that they grow up being able to talk, and then we send them to school for 20 years to learn some rules, about how to discipline your thinking, to learn some rules about how to make sure that the choices you make are ones that are going to maximize your utility. We give them lots of extra techniques for, checking whether the answer is right. All of mathematics, all of the records, look things up and so on. And I think it's easy. I mean, compared with getting a system that will speak, I think adding on all the extra things that we can do is just like teaching a kid for 20 years at school. And I don't think that we've got any magic these machines don't have. The magic was all in being able to speak grammatical English or whichever language. And the other bits are just going to be rote learning things you're taught at school. You know System 1 and System 2 stuff.
Yes.
So all the System 2,
conscious, unconscious thinking, yeah.
All the formal rules, check your answers, go slowly, make sure you're not making a mistake. easy to teach these things at, and I think we'll have systems that are, yeah, but people don't like it, and that's a different
Yes.
issue. I mean, but you want to be careful not to be a Luddite. New technology, it always beds down soon enough. You'll see. Don't worry.
a great point to finish on, David. I think this has been so much fun. I've learned a lot. I enjoy going down these rabbit holes. I think you kind of want to maintain things a little bit more strict. I think the point of podcasts is to intellectually wander and kind of see where it goes, and maybe we'll have to go more down the aphantasia rabbit hole another time. But this has been so much fun. Do you have anything else that you wanted to finish off on? I have had a really good time here. I've learned a lot. We've covered a lot. It's been a lot of fun.
I think we've covered plenty. We did quite a lot of digressing, but
that's what it's for. That's what it's for.
Yeah. No, but I'm a systematic philosopher. I want to tie things up in the end. But no,
yes, more so than me.
That's been great.
If you made it this far, then you must at least partially be interested in brain science. And who can blame you? It is the most interesting topic in the world. Twice per week, I talk to the most amazing neuroscientists in the entire world. So if you're interested, then subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment below who you'd like me to speak to next. And thank you so much for your ongoing support.